Hey, the Vikings have finally won a game. What does that mean for the bigger picture? Let's talk about it. Hey, happy Tuesday, everyone. This is Nick Miller with Climbing the Pocket and Vikings Happy Hour. Welcoming you to another Purple Process episode where we're going to take a big picture look at the Minnesota Vikings and what exactly do the twists and turns of the NFL season mean for them as we head into the future and trying to determine how can this team actually get on a path to win a Super Bowl. So, it's a good feeling to win a football game. Heading into the game against the Carolina Panthers, it's sitting at 0-3 and looking at that Panthers roster, really thinking about, what does it say about this football team if you're actually going to drop one to Carolina? It was great to see, Adam Thielen out in the field, having a pretty good game. It was fun to see Bryce Young perform, and he's probably got some growing room on that relative to maybe some of the other first round quarterbacks and CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson, who seem to be a little bit further along in the process, which worked towards the advantage of the Vikings this past Sunday, especially giving Brian Flores an opportunity to confuse the young quarterback and show him some different looks than maybe he saw in college or so far in the NFL. But the Vikings have a win in the column, so now they're sitting at 1-3. And I just like to take a second to think about, what exactly would that have meant if the Vikings, would have fell to 0-4. I know we were talking, or at least the broader Vikings community was talking last week about, all the different statistics about, now that you're 0-3, how many teams make the playoffs. But now, and if you're 0-4, has that ever happened? I think maybe one time with the Houston Texans. But it's good to know that we don't have to really dive into those statistics this week. But if you were Vikings GM Kwesi Adofo-Mensah sitting at TCO Performance Center, I bet you're really sitting there, thinking, okay, am I about to be, one game away from all these conversations following me about, trading, Kirk Cousins or, trading Danielle Hunter, or what exactly you do. And, is Justin Jefferson frustrated with being on the team? And so at least for another week, all those decisions and big talkers are put to a side. That doesn't mean that here at Purple Process, we can't dive into that a little bit, but it's good to know that after following the win, the Vikings can actually focus on their next opponent. And as we're sitting here and kind of looking at where things stand with the Vikings, there was some very interesting data and stuff that came out of this week about where the Vikings sitting through the first 4 weeks of the season, and what does this team really stand relative to the NFL? Because if you look at a lot of the advanced metrics, and I'm someone who really believes in Pro Football Focus and looking at the numbers, looking at the data analytics. I watch every single game, I watch every single play, and I have my own eye test. But I really want to know, what are our players having success and where they fit in. And speaking of which, shout out to our Matthew Collar of Purple Insider. He has a book released today. It's Football Numbers Game. Go check it out. It's a great look at the behind the scenes of PFF and how it became so influential in the game. As someone that's a big fan of PFF, I'm sure it's a great read. So please go check out that book and support Matthew. But moving on back to the main topic, if you take a look, for example, at the Vikings offensive line, I think they're currently ranked both in the top 5 in both run blocking and pass blocking. And in case you think that pass blocking is a fluke, they're also in the top 5 in ESPN's pass block win rate. And so you look at some of the strengths of this team that have traditionally been weaknesses, like now the offensive line this year, which I think that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell and offensive line coach Cooper have done a great job of fixing and growing those players throughout the season. And that's without even having Dalton Reisner potentially come in and help reinforce those positions. So Ed Ingram's been, playing decently well. I think he scored a 61 in pass block rating and the 60s in run block rating. So he had a decent week again. So you have the offensive line that's a strength. Obviously, you have Justin Jefferson doing really well. The running game has really turned on. I mentioned that run blocking grade. I think, having Cam Akers come in and Alexander Madison having another good game. So overall, if you look at it, the offense is fairly explosive. If you look at some of like the data surrounding, the big playability, throws over 20 yards, successful runs, points scored per drive when it doesn't end in a turnover. Actually, Alec Lewis of The Athletic had a really good piece that came out this morning highlighting, the fact that the Vikings are a dangerous team. And when you compare that, I think just adding on further, if you look at like their DVOA scores, Aaron Schatz and the creator of that, I think the Vikings are ranked 14th in the NFL right now. So if you look at all these advanced metrics, if you look at where they're standing, it's a pretty potent and dangerous team. The real issue so far, and it continues to be, untimely turnovers, especially when the team is in the red zone or driving on the opposite end of the 50-yard line. And you have to get to a point where, you're right now in the season, you're 31st in turnover differential. Is that a feature or is that a bug? Is it something that the Vikings can work out and start to limit those turnovers and really be able to, play, close games with competitive teams? Or is that something that's going to be a trend and continue? Last year, all those those bounces, fell right to the Vikings. And this year, we had a lucky bounce the other day when Harrison Smith had his strip sack and the ball bounced right into DJ Wanham's hands. But, if some of that is luck, some of that is just, situational mastery. And last year we were so convinced that the Vikings, had that situational mastery that, looking at it this year, it just hasn't been as good in those situations. And that's been the difference between winning games and losing games. And, as we've seen over the last few years, whether it be with Mike Zimmer or definitely these last 2 years of Kevin O'Connell, the Vikings play to the level of their competition, for the most part. They're always playing in close games. They had that many one-score wins last year, and every game so far this year has been a one score. And so heading into, this upcoming week against the Kansas City Chiefs, you might expect that the Vikings might be able to turn the ship and be competitive and get things rolling on offense. And we'll see what it comes down to at the end of the game. And you have, Patrick Mahomes versus Kirk Cousins. I'll take Patrick Mahomes every single time. And so, I think that, it's going to be difficult to overcome this week, but it is looking like the Vikings are fielding a competitive roster. If you look at that competitive rebuild, they have a team that, can compete with anyone, but it's just a matter of putting a complete game together, which has been a problem, for this team for any number of years. So it would be nice as a fan to see some consistent trends towards being able to, get these things together. And really on offense, it comes down to having some level of offensive consistency. And this is going more to my eye test than any specific data, but you can just see that, just for periods of the games, they have miscues. They can't get, they have those 3 and outs. They do things like, Kirk Cousins threw the ball, deep and out of the play of field on a short 3rd and 2. And it's just those situations like that really end up stalling the drives and stop the Vikings from, competing at the highest level. So, it's been really interesting, vantage point to look at, how this team is doing analytically relative to their outcome on the field. And I thought that this was a really interesting question that was posed by a friend of the show, Eric Eager, on Twitter over the weekend. It said, if you could take a team or take the 2022 Vikings and the 2023 Vikings and play them straight up, who do you think would be favored to win that game? And at the end of the 24-hour voting period, most of the people on Twitter said the 2022 Vikings. But in almost nearly every statistical category so far, besides for turnovers, the 2023 Vikings are a better team. And that's a kudos, I think, to, and I voted for 2023 Vikings. I don't think it would be particularly close, if I'm being honest. I think that the 2023 Vikings are a significantly better team than what we saw last year. And you have to give kudos. If you took a broader picture, think of all the players that we lost this year or in the offseason. And then look at the players who replaced it with that, it was kind of crazy to see the number of fans that were calling for saying incredible things about Marcus Davenport, that he didn't want to play and that he was just robbing the Vikings. And now, after he had a good game, you can start to see the vision that Brian Flores, Kevin O'Connell, and Kwesi Dofamenta had for Marcus Davenport in this defense, and how pairing him with Danielle Hunter and really being able to attack without blitzing 80% of the time can really help and be effective. So you can start to see the vision coming together on that. And when you combine all these things about the moves of the players that you're getting rid of and the players that you added, take someone like Josh Oliver, who's currently ranked the number one tight end in PFF, mostly I think he's the number one in receiving grade, and he is the number 2 run blocker in the NFL, which is really why they signed him in the offseason. When you start to put these pieces together, you can really see, the process shaking out. And I'm really encouraged by the moves that this regime has made to move on from older players and bring in young, talented players who can come in and compete and also could potentially have a future, with this team. I think they really, built Marcus Davenport's contract for him to be extended after the season, adding in that second void here. Josh Oliver's already signed to a 3-year contract. And so there are a lot of young pieces that this team can build off of, but there's also some tricky stuff heading towards the future. And so to that point, I did do a call out for Twitter questions, and I encourage that every single week if you guys want me to talk about something specific or anything comes up. But Tanishka, who I'm sure many of you know on Twitter for her hot takes, but she comes in and she asks, okay, so what's the future looking like over the next few weeks? Because while we're 1-3 now, I mean, that's still not a really good position. And so if you're looking at, okay, what's the next 4 games before the trade deadline? And so we take on the Chiefs at home, then we go to Chicago, which is always a tough challenge for us, no matter, how good that team is. Then we host the San Francisco 49ers on Monday Night Football. And then we're at Green Bay, I think on October 29th, which is 2 days before the trade deadline on Halloween. And so if you're to be honest and look at that, okay, going up against the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Chris Jones, who's going to be a real challenge for the entire offensive line, and Taylor Swift, between those 4, it's going to be a tough sled for the Vikings to win that game. So I think everyone would assume that it's likely the Vikings probably lose that one. So you're looking at 1-4. They should be able to go and beat the Bears with all the turmoil that they're facing. So you could jump up to 2-4. I think San Francisco might be the most complete team in the NFL right now and the biggest challenge. And so if you're betting man, you'd be betting on a San Francisco 49ers to win. So that takes us to 2-5. And then I think that game really rests on what happens next, really rests on what happens to the Green Bay Packers, who have not looked impressive this year. But the difference between 3-5 and 2-6, I think, is pretty stark when it comes to, this front office and where they want to go moving forward. I mean, if you're sitting there at 2-6, as the Minnesota Vikings, I think that the second half of the season has some opportunities for gains. But if you're going through at 2-6, it's a very big uphill climb, and it would be somewhat malpractice to hold on to some of your players who are performing well, that could be that might be leaving in free agency next year, that you can get assets for in the draft, whether that be Danielle Hunter, Jordan Hicks, KJ Osborne is another one. Harrison Smith, I know that's awful of me to say, but he might want to go to a team that actually has a chance to compete for the Super Bowl. Even someone like Ezra Cleveland, who I thought has improved a little bit this year. But you have Dalton Reisner, sitting there on the bench, who's played left guard his entire career, who can step in and see if you can get a late round pick for Ezra Cleveland. You'd have to consider that. And of course, there's Kirk Cousins. I don't think that there's really any chance that they're actually going to trade Kirk Cousins, especially with his no trade clause. But the conversation surrounding that, if this Vikings team is 2-6, are going to be significant. And so, you really have to look at, can this Vikings team steal, a game or two, a game between, the Chiefs or the 49ers to really, right the ship and get closer to 500 before that trade deadline. Because if not, we get there at 3-5 or 2-6, there's going to be a lot of tough questions about the future of this team. And you also, have to consider, whether the Wilfs are be willing to tank or give up on trade assets, or if they're going to want to, ride the 2023 season, to its completion and just hold steady. It'll be really interesting to discuss over the next few weeks, as those things come up. But, those are future conversations. For now, this Vikings team is focusing on this next game and see if you can't steal one from the Kansas City Chiefs. And that's where their mind should be. And the data suggests that they can be competitive. They just got to put a complete game together. So, really excited to continue these conversations. It's so fascinating. They're in a very interesting spot right now where they're a team that looks to be performing well, but that success just has not translated to victories due to some turnovers. So I want to thank our sponsors for today's episode. That's Badass Wood Art, Eastside Jiu-Jitsu, and especially Lake Monster Brewing. So tomorrow, the crew is going to be at Lake Monster Brewing at 7 p.m. Central. I unfortunately will not be there because I live in Ohio, but I will want to be there in spirit. And there's a rumor on the street that Miles will be buying the first round for the first 5 people there. So, be there early, get in, be prepared to ask some questions, be prepared to hang out with the crew, and they'll be excited to see you. So thanks again for joining me today. Please send some questions my way via Twitter to cover next episode. Always looking forward to your thoughts and your feelings about Minnesota Vikings. But there's a lot to look forward to, whether it be on the field or off the field moving forward. And I hope you'll join me moving forward. So thanks so much, and I'll see you guys later.